Chapter 10. No Rest for the Wizard. Revenge. 25th day, month of Mishamont, year 352 AC. Raistlin emerged from the corridors of magic into his bedroom in the Broken Shield. He was exhausted, and he was looking forward to his bed, to falling into exhausted sleep. He found, to his astonishment, that his bed was occupied. "Welcome home," said Yolanthe. She was seated on the bed. As she lifted her head, he saw her face was battered and bruised. Both eyes were blackened, one almost completely swollen shut. Her lip was split, her fine clothes were torn. Purple bruises covered her neck. "Thank you for saving my life this night, my dear," she said, mumbling through her bloody lips. "Too bad I can't return the favor." She cast a sidelong glance at the man who was standing at the window, gazing out at the three moons, which had just come together to form one unblinking eye. Emperor Hourglass did not bother to turn around. He merely glanced over his broad shoulder. His face was dark, expressionless. Raistlin felt nothing. He was going to die in the next few moments, and he was too worn, too drained to care. He supposed he should try to defend himself, cast some sort of deadly spell. The words of magic fluttered in his brain and flew off before he could catch them. "If you're going to kill me, do so now," he said wearily. "At least that way I will get some rest." Yolanthe tried to smile, but it hurt. She winced and pressed her fingers to her lips. "My lord wants the dragon orb," she said. Raistlin tore the pouch from his belt and tossed it onto the floor. The pouch opened. Marbles and the dragon orb rolled out onto the floor and lay there, gleaming in the moonlight. The three moons were starting to separate, drifting apart yet never far apart. The moonlight, silver and red, shone on the orb, and, as if basking in the magic, the orb seemed to grow and expand. Its own colored light swirled in response. Hourglass gazed at the orb entranced. He left the window and squatted down on his haunches to peer at it. The hands in the orb reached out to him. Hourglass's fingers twitched. He must be longing to touch it, to see if he could control it. He actually started to reach for it. With a dark smile, he drew back. "Nice try, Majere," said Hourglass, standing up. "I'm not as stupid as King Lorik." "Oh, yes, you are, my dear," said Yolanthe. A blast of frigid air, chill as a frozen waste of ice wall, struck Hourglass from behind. The magical cold turned his flesh blue and stole his breath. His hair and beard and armor were rimmed with hoarfrost. His limbs shuddered, his blood congealed. A look of fury and astonishment froze on his face. Unable to move, he crashed to the floor with a thud like a block of ice. "Never turn your back on a wizard," Yolanthe advised him, "especially one you just beat up." Raistlin watched, stupid with fatigue, as Yolanthe walked to Hourglass's side. She knelt down, put her hand to his neck, and began to swear. "Damn it to the abyss and back! The bastard is still alive. I thought I'd killed him for certain. Tychesis must love him." Yolanthe thrust a small crystal cone into her bosom and reached out her hand to Raistlin. "I know you're tired. I'll transport you. Hurry. We have to get out of here before his guards come to see what has happened to him." Raistlin stared at her. He was too tired to think. He had to cajole his brain into working. He shook his head and, ignoring her outstretched hand, he picked up the glowing dragon orb. It shrank at his touch, and his hand closed over it tightly. "You go," he said. can't stay in Neraka. Arrakis isn't dead. He will send the Black Ghost after you." "He tried that tonight, didn't he?" said Raistlin, looking at Yolanthe intently. A blush suffused her face. She was beautiful and alluring. Small wonder those unsuspecting black robes had opened their doors to her sultry whispers in the dead of night. "How did you know?" she asked. "I count stairs, remember. How long have you been working for Hidden Light?" "Ever since—" Yolanthe stopped, then shook her head. "It's a winter's tale, meant to be told around the fire. We don't have time for it now. My friends and I are leaving Neraka. Come with us." Raistlin was gazing into the dragon orb, watching the colors, black and green, red and white and blue, twined and writhed and twisted. "I have to change the darkness," he said. She stared at him, not understanding. Then she squeezed his hand and kissed him gently on the cheek. "Thank you, Raistlin Majere. You saved the people who are most dear to me." She flung her magical clay on the wall. The portal opened, expanded, and Yolanthe stepped into it. "Go with the gods," she called to him. The portal shut behind her. "I plan to," said Raistlin. He held the glowing dragon orb in his hands and looked out the window to the 3 moons. "You owe me," he told them. The hands in the dragon orb reached out to him, caught him up, and carried him away. Chapter 11. God's Home, Old Friends. 25th day, month of Mishamont, year 352 AC. Raistlin woke to find himself lying on hard rock, cold and polished, so it seemed he was resting on the surface of a glittering black ice-bound lake. He was surrounded by a circle of 21 pillars of stone, shapeless and rough-hewn. The pillars stood separate and apart, yet so close together that Raistlin could not see what lay beyond them. He had no idea how long he had been asleep. He recalled periods of drowsy semi-consciousness, thinking that he should wake, that the sands in his hourglass were falling fast, the world was turning beneath him, events were happening, and he was not there to shape them. He tried several times to grasp hold of the rim of consciousness and pull himself out of sleep's deep well, only to find that he lacked the strength. Once he was awake, he was loath to move, as one is reluctant to rise from bed on a grey morning when raindrops pelt gently on the window pane. The air was still and pure, and it carried to him the scent of spring. But the scent was faint, the season far away, distant, as though there, in that vale, the passing of years did not matter. Raistlin looked up into the sky and judged by the position of the stars that the time was early morning, though what the date might be he had no idea. The sky was black as death above. Faint light and glimmering in the east promised a rosy dawn. The stars shone bright, none brighter than the red star, the forging fire of Reorx. The constellations of the other gods were visible, all of them at once, which was not possible. The previous autumn, Raistlin had looked into the sky and seen that 2 constellations were missing, that of Paladine and that of Tychesis. How long past that seemed. Autumn's leaves had gone up in flame and smoke. Winter had honored the dead with snow, white and pure. The snow was melting, and new life, born of death and sacrifice, was stubbornly fighting to push its way through the frozen ground. "God's home," said Raistlin to himself softly. He had slept on the hard rock without even a blanket, yet he was not stiff or sore. He rose to his feet and shook out his robes and checked to make certain that the staff of mages was at his side. He could see the constellations reflected in the shining black surface. Stars above and stars below, much like an hourglass. The pillars that surrounded him were much like prison bars. He saw no way to pass between them. For some, faith is a prison, he reflected. For others, faith brings freedom. Raistlin walked steadily towards the pillars and found himself on the other side without knowing how he came to be there. Interesting, he murmured. He was thirsty and hungry. He rarely ate much at the best of times, and he had undergone such tension and inner turmoil the previous day that he had forgotten to eat at all. As if thinking made it so, he found a stream of clear water running down from the mountains. Raistlin drank his fill and, dipping a handkerchief in the water, he washed his face and body. The water had restorative powers, it seemed, for he felt strong and revived, and though there was nothing to eat, he was no longer hungry. Raistlin had read something of God's home, though not much, for not much had been written. The ascetic who had travelled to Neraka had tried to find God's home, which was very near that dread city, but he had been unsuccessful. God's home was the most holy site in the world. Who had created it and why were not known. The ascetic had offered various theories. Some said that when the gods had finished creating the world, they came together in this place to rejoice. Another theory held that God's home was man-made, a holy shrine to the gods erected by some lost and forgotten civilization. What was known was that only those chosen by the gods were permitted to enter. Raistlin felt a sense of urgency, the gods breathing down his neck. Everything happens for a reason. I need to make sure the reason is mine. Raistlin settled himself on the rocky floor near the stream and drew the dragon orb from the pouch. He placed the dragon orb on the surface before him and, chanting the words, reached out to the hands that reached out to him. He had no idea if his plan would work, for he was still discovering the orb's capabilities. For what he had read, the wizards who created the orb had used it to look into the future. If the orb's eyes could see into the future, why not the present? It seemed a much easier task. I am looking for someone, he told the orb. I want to know what this person is doing and hear what he is saying and see what he is seeing at this very moment. Is that possible, Viper? It is. Think of this person only. Concentrate on this person to the exclusion of all else. Speak the name 3 times. Caramon, said Raistlin, and he brought his twin to mind, or rather, he no longer attempted to drive him away. Caramon, Raistlin said again, and he stared into the orb that was swirling with color. Caramon, Raistlin said a 3rd time sharply, as when they were young, and he was trying to waken him. Caramon had always been fond of sleeping in. The orb's colors dissipated like morning mists. Raistlin saw pouring rain, the wet face of a rock wall. Standing around in a sudden group were his friends. Tanis Half-Elven, Tika Whalen, Tasselhoff Barefoot, Flint Fireforge, and his twin brother Caramon. With them was an old man in mouse-colored robes and a disreputable hat. Fitzman, Raistlin said softly. Of course. Tanis and Caramon wore the black armor and the insignia of Dragon Army officers. Tanis had put on a helm that was too big for him, not so much for protection as to conceal the pointed ears that would have revealed his elven blood. Caramon was not wearing a helm. He had probably not been able to find one big enough. His breastplate was a tight fit. The straps that held it on were stretched to their limit over his broad chest. As Raistlin watched, Tanis, his face distorted with anger, looked swiftly around at the small group. His gaze focused on Caramon. "Where is Baron?" he asked in urgent tones. Raistlin's ears pricked at the name. His brother's face went red. "I don't know, Tanis. I thought he was next to me." Tanis was furious. "He's our only way into Neraka, and he's the only reason they're keeping Lorna alive if they catch him." "Don't worry, lad." That was Flint, always Tanis's comforting father. "We'll find him." "I'm sorry, Tanis," Caramon was mumbling. "I was thinking about Raist. I know I shouldn't." "How in the name of the Abyss does that blasted brother of yours work mischief when he's not even here?" "How indeed?" Raistlin asked with a smile and a sigh. So Tanis had captured Barum and was apparently planning to exchange him for Lorna. Only Caramon had lost him. Raistlin wondered if Tanis knew the reason the Dark Queen wanted Barum so desperately. If he knew, would he be so eager to hand him over? Raistlin did not hazard a guess. He did not know these people. They had changed. The war, their trials had changed them. Caramon, good-natured, cheerful, outgoing, was lost and alone, seeking the part of himself that was missing. Tika Whalen stood beside him, trying to be supportive, but unable to understand. Pert and pretty, Tika with bouncing red curls and haughty laughter. Her red curls might be wet and drooping, but their fire was still bright in the spring rain. She carried a sword, not mugs of ale, and wore pieces of mismatched armor. Raistlin had been annoyed by Tika's love for his brother, or perhaps he'd been jealous of that love. Not because Raistlin had been in love with Tika himself, but because Caramon had found someone else to love besides his twin. "I did you a favor by leaving my brother," Raistlin told Caramon. "It is time for you to let go." His attention shifted to Tanis, the leader of the group. Once he had been calm and collected, but he was falling apart as Raistlin watched. The woman he loved had been taken from him, and he was desperate to save her, though it meant destroying the world in the process. Fitzbin, the befuddled old wizard in the mouse-colored robe, standing apart, watching and waiting quietly, patiently. Raistlin remembered a question Tanis had asked him once, long in the past, when the autumn winds blew cold. "Do you believe we were chosen, Raistlin?" "Why? We're not the stuff of heroes." Raistlin remembered his answer. "But who chose us, and for what purpose?" He looked at Fitzbin, and he had his answer. At least, that was part of the answer. Tasselhoff Burfoot. Irrepressible, irresponsible, irritating. If Barum was the Everman, Tass was the Everchild. The child had grown up, like Mary, more's the pity. As Raistlin watched, Tanis angrily ordered the rest of the group to search for Barum. They wearily retraced their steps, backtracking along the trail to see if they could find where Barum had left it. It was Flint who discovered Barum's footprints in the mud and gave chase, leaving the others behind. "Flint, wait up!" Tanis yelled. Raistlin lifted his head, startled. The shout had not come from the orb. It had come from the other side of the rock wall. Raistlin looked in the direction of Tanis's voice and saw a narrow, tunnel-like opening in the wall, an opening he could have sworn had not been there earlier. He had no time for wonder, and no more need for the dragon orb, apparently. Kitara had been right. His friends had been searching for God's home, and it seemed they had found it. Raistlin returned the orb to its pouch. Picking up the staff, he hurriedly whispered the words to a spell, hoping as he did so that magic worked in that sacred place. Sermin Shak Darimayat, Kulitmas Antebentuk. Raistlin had cast a spell to make himself invisible. He looked into the stream. He could not see his own reflection, and if he could not see himself, his friends would not be able to see him. The magic had worked. The one possible exception might be Fitzbin. Taking no chances, Raistlin glided between the pillars of stone and concealed himself behind them, just as a man crawled through the opening in the rocks. It was the man with the old face and young eyes, the man who had been on board the ship in Flotsam, the man who had steered them into the whirlpool. As Barham rose to his feet, an emerald embedded in his chest flashed green in the morning sun. Barham Everman, the green gemstone man, Jasla's brother, the man who could set Queen Takhisis free or keep her forever imprisoned in the abyss. Barham looked fearfully behind him. He wore a hunted expression, a fox fleeing the hounds. He ran across the stone floor of the Vale. Flint and the others would not be far behind, but for the moment, Barham and Raistlin were alone in God's home. A few magical words and Raistlin could spellbind Barham, make him a prisoner. He could use the dragon orb to transport them back to Neraka. He could present Takhisis with a gift of inestimable value. She would be grateful. She would give him whatever his heart desired. He might even be able to bargain for Lorna's freedom, but he would always have to sleep with one eye open. Raistlin watched Barham run past him. The Everman had sighted what appeared to be another opening in a far wall, and here came Flint running after him. The dwarf's face was flushed with excitement and exertion. Barham had a lengthy head start. It seemed unlikely that Flint would win the race. Hearing a shout behind him, Raistlin turned to see Tasselhoff crawling through the narrow tunnel. The Kender emerged in the Vale and was exclaiming loudly over the stone pillars and the stone floor and other wonders. Raistlin heard the voices of his friends on the other side of the tunnel. He could not make out what they were saying. "Tanis, hurry!" Tass called. "There's no other way." Caramon's voice echoed dismally through the narrow hole. Tasselhoff searched the Vale, trying to find Flint, but the pillars stood between the dwarf and the Kender, blocking his view. Running back to the opening, Tass bent down and peered inside. He yelled something into the tunnel, and someone yelled back. By the sounds of it, they had tried to crawl through it. Caramon, it seemed, was stuck. Flint was actually gaining on Barham. The morning sunlight sent shadows crawling over the rock walls, and Barham had seemingly lost sight of the opening. He was running back and forth like a rabbit trapped at a fence line, searching for the way out. Then he found it and made a dive for it. Barham was about to crawl through the hole. Raistlin was pondering what he should do, wondering if he should try to stop Barham, when suddenly Flint gave a terrible cry. The dwarf grabbed at his chest and, moaning in pain, sagged to his knees. "His heart, I knew it," Raistlin said. "I warned him." He started instinctively to go to the dwarf's aid, then brought himself up short. He was no longer a part of their lives. They were no longer a part of his. Raistlin watched and waited. There was nothing he could do anyway. Barham heard Flint cry out and turned fearfully round. Seeing the old dwarf drop to the ground, Barham hesitated. He looked at the opening in the wall, and he looked at Flint, and then came running to help. Beren knelt beside the dwarf, whose face was ashen. "What is wrong? What can I do?" Beren asked. "It's nothing." Flint gasped for air, his hand pressed against his chest. "An upset stomach, that's all. Something I ate. Just help me stand. I can't seem to catch my breath. If I walk around a little." Beren assisted the old dwarf to his feet. From the opposite side of the veil, Tasselhoff had finally found them. But of course, the Kender got it wrong. He thought Beren was attacking Flint. "It's Beren!" the Kender shouted frantically. "And he's doing something to Flint! Hurry, Tanis!" Flint took a step and staggered. His eyes rolled up in his head, his legs buckled. Beren caught the dwarf in his arms and laid him down gently on the rocks, then hovered over him, uncertain what to do. Hearing the sounds of feet pounding toward him, Beren stood up. He seemed relieved. Help was coming. "What have you done?" Tanis raved. "You've killed him!" He drew his sword and plunged the blade into Beren's body. Beren shuddered and cried out. He sagged forward, his body impaled on the sword, falling onto Tanis, his weight nearly carrying them both to the ground. Blood washed over Tanis's hands. He yanked his blade free and turned, ready to fight Caramon, who was trying to pull him away. Beren was moaning on the ground, blood pouring from the fatal wound. Tika was sobbing. Flint had seen none of it. He was leaving the world, starting on his soul's next long journey. Tasselhoff took hold of the dwarf's hand and urged him to get up. "Leave me be, you doorknob," Flint grumbled weakly. "Can't you see I'm dying?" Tasselhoff gave a grief-stricken wail and fell to his knees. "You're not dying, Flint. Don't say that." "I should know if I'm dying or not," Flint said irately, glowing. "You thought you were dying before, and you were just seasick," Taz said, wiping his nose. "Maybe you... He glanced around at the stone floor of the veil. "Maybe you're ground-sick." "Ground-sick," Flint snorted. Then, seeing the Kender's misery, the dwarf's expression softened. There, lad. Don't waste time blubbering like a gully dwarf. Run and fetch Tanis for me." Tasselhoff gave a snuffle and did as he was told. Beren's eyelids fluttered. He gave another moan and sat up. He put his hand to his chest. The emerald, soaked with blood, sparkled in the sunlight. Hope lives, no matter all the mistakes we make, no matter our blunders and our misunderstandings, no matter the grief and sorrow and loss, no matter how deep the darkness, hope lives. Raistlin left his place by the pillars and came unseen to stand over Flint, who lay with his eyes closed. For a moment, the dwarf was alone. Some distance away, Caramon was trying to restore Tanis to sanity. Tasselhoff was tugging on Fitzbin's sleeve, trying to make him understand. Fitzbin understood all too well. Raistlin knelt beside the dwarf. Flint's face was ashen and contorted with pain, his hands clenched. Sweat covered his brow. "You never liked me," said Raistlin. "You never trusted me. Yet you were good to me, Flint. I cannot save your life, but I can ease the pain of dying. Give you time to say goodbye." Raistlin reached into his pouch and drew out a small vial containing juice distilled from poppy seeds. He poured a few drops into the dwarf's mouth. The lines of pain eased. Flint's eyes opened. As his friends gathered around Flint to say goodbye, Raistlin was there with them, though none of them ever knew it. He told himself more than once that he should leave, that he had work to do, that his ambitious plans for his future hung in the balance, but he remained with his friends and his brother. Raistlin stayed until Flint sighed and closed his eyes, and the last breath left the dwarf's body. Raistlin chanted the magic beneath his breath. The corridor opened before him. He walked into it and did not look back. Chapter 12. Kitiara's Knife. Paul Salin's Sword. 25th day, month of Mishimont, year 352 AC. Kitiara reached Neraka early on the morning of the 25th, fearing she was late for the council meeting, only to find that Arrakis himself had not yet arrived. The plans for the meeting were thrown into confusion, for none of the other High Lords or their armies could enter the city ahead of the Emperor. Arrakis did not trust his fellow High Lords. If they were allowed inside Neraka, they might shut its gates and fill its walls with warriors and try to keep him out. Kitiara had been expecting to move into her luxurious quarters in the temple. Instead, she was forced to camp outside the city walls, living in a tent that was so small and cramped she could not pace about, as she was wont to do when she needed to think. Kitiara was in a foul mood. She was still suffering a headache from where she'd hit her head on the stone floor of the vault. She was glad for the excuse to leave Dargard Keep. Though she felt like crap, she had summoned Sky and flown to join her army. The thought of challenging Arrakis for the crown of power had eased the pain in her head. But she had arrived here only to discover that no one knew where Arrakis was or when he would deign to grace them with his presence. And that left Kitiara nothing to do except fume and complain to her aide-de-camp, a Bozak draconian named Gakon. "Arrakis is doing this deliberately to unsettle the rest of us," Kitiara muttered. She was sitting hunched over a small table, her head in her hands, massaging her throbbing temples. "He's trying to intimidate us, Gakon, and I won't stand for it." Gakon made a noise, a kind of snort and sneer. The Bozak grinned, his tongue flicked out of his mouth. Kitiara raised her head and looked at him sharply. "You've heard something. What's going on?" Gakon had been with Kitiara since before the beginning of the war. Though officially known as her aide-de-camp, his unofficial title was Kitiara's Knife. Gakon was loyal to Kitiara and to his queen, in that order. Some said he was in love with the Blue Lady, though they were always careful to say that behind his back, never to his face. The Bozak was smart, secretive, resourceful, and extremely dangerous. He had earned his nickname. Gakon glanced out the tent flap, then drew it shut and tied it securely. He leaned over Kitiara and spoke softly. "My lord Arrakis is late because he was wounded. He very nearly died." Kitiara stared at the Bozak. "What? How?" "Keep your voice down, my lord," the Draconian said solemnly. "News like this, should it leak out, might embolden the Emperor's enemies." "Yes, of course, you're right," said Kit with equal solemnity. "Do you trust your source for this disturbing information?" "Completely," said Gakon. Kitiara smiled. "I need details. Arrakis has not been in battle lately, so I assume someone tried to assassinate him, and very nearly succeeded. Who was it?" Gakon paused to build the suspense, then said with a grin, "His witch." "Yolanthe," Kitiara said loudly, forgetting in her astonishment that she was supposed to be circumspect. Gakon cast her a warning glance, and Kit lowered her voice. "When did this happen?" "The night of the Eye, my lord." "But that's not possible. Yolanthe died that night. Kitiara gestured to some dispatches. I have the reports. Fabricated, my lord. It seems that Talent Orin. Kitiara glared at him. Orin? What does he have to do with this? I want to know about Yolanthe. Gakan bowed. If you will be patient, my lord. It seems that Orin found out about the plot to kill him and his fellow members of Hidden Light. He sent word around among the troops that the church was going to try to clean up the city of Neraka. Orders had been given to burn the broken shield and the hairy troll. Naturally, the soldiers were not pleased. When the death squads arrived to carry out their orders, they found armed soldiers guarding the taverns. Orin and his friends escaped. What has this to do with Yolanthe? Kit demanded impatiently. She is a member of Hidden Light. Kitiara stared. That's impossible. She saved my life. I believe she had some thought of serving you at the time, my lord. She grew disenchanted with you, however, after you wanted to take away the magic. She had been doing odd jobs for Orin. The two became lovers, and she threw in her lot with him. So how does Arrakis fit into this? Kit asked, confused. The Emperor wanted the dragon orb your brother has in his possession. Arrakis saved Yolanthe from the death squads, though not from love. He told her that if she valued her own life, she would have to kill Raistlin. Arrakis went with her to make certain she did as she was told and to obtain the dragon orb. But Yolanthe, instead of attacking Raistlin, turned on Arrakis, said Kitiara. I am told that if it were not for the intervention of the Nightlord at the behest of her dark majesty, the Emperor would have died of frostbite. Kitiara threw back her head and laughed. Gakan permitted himself a smile and a flick of his tail, but that was all. Has Arrakis thawed out? Asked Kitiara, still chuckling. The Emperor has been restored to health, my lord. He will arrive in Neraka tomorrow. What happened to Yolanthe? She fled, my lord. She left Neraka with Orin and the rest of Hidden Light. It's a shame I underestimated her. Kitiara shook her head. I could have used her. What about Raistlin? He has vanished, my lord. It is assumed he also left Neraka, though no one knows where he went. Not that it matters, said Gakan with a shrug. He is a marked man. The Emperor wants him dead. Queen Takis wants him dead. The Nightlord wants him dead. If Raistlin Majere is still in Neraka, he is a monumental fool. And whatever my brother is, he was never that. Thank you for the information, Gakan. I must think about all of this, said Kitiara. The Bozak bowed and departed. One of the aides came in to light a lantern, for night had fallen, and asked her if she wanted supper. Kit ordered him to leave. Post a guard outside. No one is to disturb me this night. Kitiara sat, staring at the flickering flame of the candle, seeing Arrakis' brutish face. He believed she was conspiring against him. Well, she was. And he had no one to blame but himself. He had always encouraged rivalry among his High Lords. The knowledge that each High Lord was in danger of being replaced by a rival kept them all on their toes. The flaw in that was that some High Lord might decide to slit another High Lord's throat, and that throat could be Arrakis'. Arrakis distrusted all his High Lords, but he distrusted her the most. Kitiara was popular among her forces, far more popular with her troops than Arrakis was with his. She saw to it that her soldiers were paid. Most important, Kitiara was looked upon with favor by the Dark Queen, who was not viewing Arrakis fondly those days. He had made too many mistakes. He should have won the war with a few swift and brutal crushing blows, ending it before the good dragons entered the fight on the side of the light. He should have taken the High Clerist's tower before the knights could reinforce it. He should have relied on dragons who could attack from the air, where they had the advantage, and far less on ground troops. And he should not have allowed Kitiara to ally herself with the powerful Lord Suth. Takhisis was undoubtedly regretting having chosen Arrakis to lead her dragon armies. Kitiara seemed to feel her Dark Majesty's hand on her shoulder, pushing her toward the throne, urging her to take the crown of power. Strange. Kitiara really did feel a hand on her shoulder. What the? Kitiara jumped to her feet and drew her sword, all in the same swift movement. She was about to strike when she saw who it was. "You," she gasped. "The monumental fool," said Raistlin. Kitiara held her sword poised and regarded him through narrowed eyes. "Why are you here? Why have you come?" "Not to kill you, my sister, if that's what you fear. You are going to kill me, that is true, but I'm willing to put our quarrel down to sibling rivalry." Kitiara smiled, though she did not sheath her sword. "I'll keep my weapon handy, just in case you feel the stirrings of sibling rivalry. So why are you here, baby brother? You're in danger. You've made powerful enemies. The Emperor wants you dead. A goddess wants you dead." Kit shook her head. "If you're expecting me to protect you, there's nothing I can do." "I expect nothing from you, my sister. I came with something for you." Raistlin stood with his hands hidden in the sleeves of his robes, his cowl thrown back. The lantern light flickered in the strange hourglass eyes. "You want the crown of power," he told her. "I can help you take it." "You're mistaken," said Kitiara gravely. "Arrakis is my emperor, and I'm his loyal subject." "And I'm the king of the elves," said Raistlin with a sneer. Kitiara's lips twitched. "In truth, I'm concerned for the Emperor's health." She ran her index finger along the groove in the sword that allowed the blood to run down the blade and keep from fouling it. "Arrakis wears himself out with affairs of state. He should take rest, a long, long rest. So what do you have in mind? How can you help me?" "I have many arrows in my quiver," said Raistlin coolly. "Which I choose to use will depend on the circumstances in which I choose to use it." "You blather like the king of the elves," said Kit irritably. "You won't tell me because you do not trust me." "It's a good thing I don't, my sister, otherwise I would be dead by now," Raistlin said dryly. Kitiara stared at him a moment, then she sheathed her sword and resumed her seat. "Let us say I accept your offer. You help make me emperor. What do you expect in return?" "The Tower of High Sorcery in Palanthas." Kitiara was astonished. "That monstrosity? It's cursed. Why would you want that?" Raistlin smiled. "This from the woman who lives in Dargard Keep." "Not for long," Kitiara said. "You can have your cursed tower. I don't suppose anyone else would want it." She put her elbows on the table and regarded him expectantly. "What is your plan?" "You must get me inside the temple tomorrow when the council meets." Kitiara stared at him. "You are a monumental fool. You might as well just walk into a dungeon cell and lock yourself up and be done with it. All your enemies will be there, including Queen Takhisis. If she or any of them discovered you, you would not survive long enough for death to rattle in your throat." I have the ability to conceal myself from my mortal enemies. As for the immortal, you must persuade Takhisis that I am more of use to her alive than dead." Kit snorted. "You thwarted her plot to destroy the gods. You betrayed her trust on more than one occasion. What could I possibly say to convince Takhisis to let you live?" "I know where to find Barum Everman." Kitiara caught her breath. She gazed at him in disbelief, and then she leaped to her feet and seized hold of his arms. He was bone and skin, no muscle, and she was reminded of the sickly little boy she had helped to raise. As if he were that little boy, she gave him an impatient shake. "You know where Barum is. Tell me." "Do we have a bargain?" Raistlin countered. Yes, we have a bargain, damn you. I'll find a way to get you inside the temple, and I'll talk to the queen. Now tell me, where is the Everman?" "Our mother gave birth to only one fool, my sister, and that was Caramon. If I tell you now, what is to prevent you from killing me? To find Barum, you must keep me alive." Kitiara gave him a shove that nearly knocked him down. "You're lying. You have no idea where Barum is. Our deal is off." Raistlin shrugged and turned to go. "Wait, stop." Kitiara gnawed her lip and glared at him. Finally she said, "Why should I go along with you?" "Because you want the crown of power, and Aurelius wears it. I have read about this crown, and I know how the magic works. Anyone who wears the crown is invincible to—" "I know all that," Kitiara interrupted impatiently. "I don't need a damn book to tell me." "I was about to say the crown is invincible to physical attacks and most types of ordinary magical assaults." Raistlin finished coolly. Kitiara frowned. "I don't get it." "I have never been ordinary," said Raistlin. Kitiara's eyes gleamed beneath her long, dark lashes. "We have a deal, baby brother. Tomorrow will be a momentous day in the history of Kryn." Chapter 13. The Spiritor, Temple of the Dark Queen. 26th day, month of Mishamont, year 352 AC. The sun rose, bloodshot and bleary-eyed and sullen after a night of drunken chaos. The gutters of the streets of Neraka ran red with blood in the pre-dawn hours of that momentous day, and yet the enemy was nowhere in sight. The forces of the Dragon High Lords were fighting among themselves. Since the Emperor had been late in arriving, the troops of the other High Lords had been forbidden to enter the city of Neraka, which meant they were forbidden to partake of Neraka's ale and dwarf spirits and other pleasures. The soldiers, many of whom had been forced-marched in order to reach Neraka in time, had made the march and endured the floggings, the putrid water, and the bad food because they were promised a holiday in Neraka. When they were told that they could not enter the city and that they had to keep eating the same bad food and drink nothing but water, they mutinied. 2 High Lords, Lucian of Takar, half-ogre leader of the Black Dragon Army, and Salah Khan, leader of the Green, had been waging their own private war for a month. Each wanted to extend his holdings into the other's territory. The humans of Kur, under the leadership of Salah Khan, had always hated the ogres, who, for their part, had always hated the humans. The 2 races had become reluctant allies in the war, but with the war going badly, every High Lord was looking out for himself. When fights broke out among their troops, each blamed the other, and neither did anything to stop the fighting. The White Dragon Army was in the worst state, for the army had no leader. The hobgoblin Toady, who held that position, had not shown up for the meeting, and rumor had it that he was dead. Draconian and human commanders began fighting among themselves for leadership, each hoping to ingratiate himself with the Emperor, and no one doing anything to maintain discipline and order in the ranks. Only one High Lord, the Blue Lady Kitiara, managed to keep her forces under control. Her officers and troops were loyal to her and highly disciplined. They were proud of their High Lord and proud of themselves, and though some grumbled that they were missing out on the fun, they stayed in their camp. Soldiers of the Red Dragon Army were already in the city, and they had been given orders to keep the others out until the Emperor arrived. That proved a difficult task, since Draconians could simply fly over the walls, and they crowded in the Broken Shield and the Hairy Troll, both under new management. When the Narakan Guard, backed by soldiers of the Red Dragon Army, tried to expel the Draconians during the night, fights broke out. The Nightlord, seeing that the Narakan Guard was unequal to the task of dealing with the unruly mobs, and afraid that the fighting would spill over onto temple grounds, dispatched temple guards to assist. That left the temple undermanned at a critical time, right when the Nightlord was preparing for the War Council. The Nightlord was furious and laid all the blame on Auricus, who, whispers said, had been so stupid as to nearly get himself done in by his own troll-up. The Nightlord ordered every dark pilgrim in the city and surrounding environs to assemble at the temple and assist with security. Raistlin was up before dawn. He had spent the night in the tunnels beneath Lute's shop. That morning he took off his dyed black robes. He ran his hand over the cloth. The dyer had not lied. The black color had not faded, had not turned green. They had served him well. He folded them and laid them neatly on the chair. He tied the pouches containing his spell components and the dragon orb onto a strip of leather and hung the pouches around his neck. He attached the thong with a silver knife onto the wrist of his hand and tested it to make certain the knife would fall into his palm at a flick of his wrist. Finally, he dressed himself in the black velvet robes and golden medallion of a spiritor, a high-ranking cleric of the gods of darkness. Kitiara had given Raistlin the disguise, telling him how she had encountered the spiritor during her escape from Auricus's prison. The soft cloth slid down Raistlin's neck and shoulders. He arranged the bulky fabric so his pouches were underneath, concealed from sight. Clerics drew their holy magic from prayers to their gods, not from rose petals and bad guano. That done, he set the dragon orb on the table and placed his hands upon it. "Show me, my brother," he commanded. The colors of the orb shimmered and swirled. Hands appeared in the orb, but they were not the familiar hands. They were skeletal hands, fleshless with bony fingers and the long, hideous nails of a corpse. Raistlin gasped, abruptly breaking the spell. He snatched his hands away. He heard the sound of laughter and the hated voice. "If your armor is made of dross, I will find a crack in it." "We both want the same thing," Raistlin said to Fist and Dantilis. "I have the means to achieve it. Interfere and we both lose." Raistlin waited tensely for the reply. When it did not come, he hesitated. Then, not seeing any hands, he grabbed the orb and thrust it into the pouch. He did not use the orb again, but made his way through the tunnels that took him underneath the city wall and into Neraka. A large crowd of dark clerics was gathered in front of the temple by the time Raistlin arrived. The line extended down the street and wrapped around the building. Raistlin was about to take his place at the end when it occurred to him that a spiritor such as he was pretending to be would not wait in line with lowly pilgrims. To do so might look suspicious. Raistlin rapped the shins of those in front of him with the end of the staff of mages, ordering them to get out of the way. Several rounded on him angrily, only to shut their mouths and swallow their ire when they saw the sunlight flash on his medallion. Sullenly the dark pilgrims drew aside to allow Raistlin to bully his way through to the front of the line. Raistlin kept his hood pulled low over his head. He was wearing black leather gloves to conceal his golden skin as well as his knife. He feigned a limp, giving him a plausible reason for leaning on a staff. And though the staff of mages garnered some curious glances, the staff had a way of appearing nondescript as circumstances required. Arriving at the temple entrance, Raistlin presented his pass, also provided by Kit, and waited with unconcealed impatience as the draconian god studied it. The draconian finally waved a clawed hand. "You have leave to enter, spiritor." Raistlin started to walk through the ornate double doors, which were adorned with the representation of Tychus as the five-headed dragon, when another guard, a human, halted him. "I want to see your face. Remove your hood." "I wear my cowl for a reason," said Raistlin. "And you'll take it off for a reason," said the guard, and he reached out his hand. "Very well," said Raistlin, "but be warned, I am a follower of Morgan." He drew back his hood. The guard's face twisted in fear and revulsion. He wiped his hand on his uniform to remove any possible contamination. Several clerics waiting their turn in line behind Raistlin shoved each other aside in their haste to move away from him. Of all the gods in the Dark Pantheon, Morgan, god of disease and corruption, was the most loathsome. "Would you like to see my hands?" Raistlin asked, and started to pull off the black gloves. The guard muttered something unintelligible and jerked his thumb toward the doors. Raistlin drew his hood over his head, and no one stopped him. As he entered the temple, he could hear behind him the shocked comments from the onlookers. Chunks of flesh falling off, lips rotted away. You could see the tendons and the bone. Living skull. Raistlin was pleased. His illusion spell had worked. He considered maintaining the illusion, but keeping the spell going all day would be draining. He would simply keep his hood over his face. Raistlin joined a black mass of clerics milling around in the entryway. He asked one how to find the council chamber. "I have traveled from the east. This is my first time visiting Her Dark Majesty's temple," Raistlin said by way of explanation. "I do not know my way around." The dark pilgrim was pleased to be singled out by a cleric of such high office, and she offered to personally escort the spiritor. As she led him through the convoluted corridors to the council hall, she described the events planned for the War Council, or the High Conclave, as Hourglass termed it. "The meeting of the High Lords will commence with the setting of the sun. An hour after," the pilgrim's voice grew soft with awe, "our Dark Queen Tychus will join her High Lords to declare victory in the war." A trifle premature, Raistlin thought. "What happens during the High Conclave?" he asked. "First, the Emperor's troops will take their places at the foot of his throne. Then the troops of the High Lords will enter, and after that, the High Lords themselves. Last to come will be the Emperor. When all are assembled, the High Lords will swear their loyalty to the Emperor and Her Dark Majesty. The High Lords will present the Emperor with gifts to the goddess as a mark of their devotion. We hear, the Dark Pilgrim added in a confidential tone, that one of the gifts will be the elf woman known as the Golden General. She will be sacrificed to Takis in the Dark Watch rites. I hope you will be able to attend, Spiritor. We'd be honored by your presence. Raistlin said he looked forward to it. This is the council chamber, announced the pilgrim, bringing him to the main door. We are not permitted to go in, but you can go inside. It is most impressive. As with all other chambers in the temple, the circular council hall existed half on the ethereal plane and half in the real world, and was designed to unsettle all who looked upon it. Everything was as it appeared to be, and nothing was what it appeared. The black granite floor was solid and shifted underfoot. The walls were made of the same black granite, making the observer feel the dark rising all around him in a tidal wave meant to drown the world. Raistlin, peering upward to the domed ceiling, was astonished and displeased to see several dragons perched among the eaves. He was staring at the dragons and wondering how they might affect his plans, when he suddenly had the horrible impression that the ceiling was falling on him. He ducked involuntarily, then heard the Dark Pilgrim give a dry chuckle. Raistlin stared at the ceiling until the sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach subsided. On those 4 platforms, said the guide, gesturing, are the sacred thrones of the Dragon High Lords. The white is for Lord Todi, the green for Salah Khan, the black for Lucian of Takar, and the blue is for the Blue Lady, Kitara Uthmatar. The platforms are rather small, said Raistlin. The guide bristled, taking offense. They are most imposing. I beg your pardon, said Raistlin. What I meant was that the platforms are not large enough to hold the High Lord and all his bodyguards. Don't you fear assassins? Ah, I see what you mean, said the guide stiffly. No one other than the High Lord is permitted on the platform. The bodyguards stand on the stairs that lead up to the platform, and they encircle the platform itself. No assassin could possibly get by. I assume the large ornate throne with all the jewels at the front of the hall is for the Emperor? Yes, that is where his Imperial Majesty will sit. And you see the dark alcove above his throne? Raistlin had found it difficult to look at anything else. His eyes were constantly drawn to that shadowy area, and he had known what the alcove housed before the guide told him. That is where our queen will make her triumphant entrance into the world. You are fortunate, Spiritor, you will be there with her. I will, Raistlin asked, startled. The Emperor has his throne beneath her. Our Nightlord stands close to her dark majesty, and dignitaries such as yourself, Spiritor, will be standing alongside her. The guide sighed with envy. You are very lucky to be so close to her dark majesty. Indeed, said Raistlin. He and Kit had planned that he would join her on her own platform. He could work his magic from there. There were risks in that. He would be in full view of everyone in the council hall, including Aurelius, and though Raistlin was disguised as a cleric, the moment he started to cast his spell, everyone in the hall would know he was a wizard. The longer he thought about it, the more he realized that the Night Lord's platform would serve him far better. I will be standing above Aurelius, he reflected. The Emperor will have his back to me. True, I will be close to Takis, but she will not be paying attention to me. Her attention will be focused on her High Lords. We should be going, the guide said abruptly. It is almost time for midday rituals. You can accompany me." "I do not want to be a burden," said Raistlin, who had been wondering how to get rid of the woman so he could go exploring on his own. "I will find my own way forward." "Attendance is mandatory," said the guide sternly. Raistlin swore beneath his breath, but there was no help for it. His guide steered him away from the hall and into the maze that was the temple, where they immediately got caught up in a confused mass of dark clerics and soldiers, all attempting to enter the council hall. The heat from the hundreds of bodies was intense. Raistlin was sweating in his velvet robes. His palms in the black leather gloves were itchy and wet. He disliked the feeling, and he longed to rip the gloves off. He dared not do so. His golden skin would have caused comment. He feared he would be recognized from the time when he'd been imprisoned here. Just as the crowd seemed about to thin out, a large Baz Draconian appeared out of nowhere and barged into them. "Make way!" the Draconian was yelling. "Dangerous prisoners! Make way! Make way!" People fell back as ordered. The prisoners came into view. One of them was Tika, walking directly behind the guard. Her red curls were limp and bedraggled, as she had long, bloody scratches on her arms. Whenever she slowed down, a Baz Draconian gave her a shove from behind. Caramon came next, carrying Tasselhoff slung over his shoulder. Caramon was protesting loudly that they had no reason to arrest him. He was a commander in the dragon army. They'd made a big mistake. So, what if he didn't have the right papers? He demanded to see whoever was in charge. Tass's face was bloody and bruised, and he must have been unconscious because he was quiet. And Tasselhoff barefoot, in such an interesting situation, would have never been quiet. Where is Tanis? Raistlin wondered. Caramon, insecure and self-doubting, would never abandon his leader. Perhaps Tanis was dead. The fact that Tasselhoff was injured suggests a fight had taken place. Kender never did know when to keep their mouth shut. There was one other person in the group, a tall man with a long white beard. Raistlin didn't recognize him at first, not until Tika stumbled. The Baz Draconian shoved her, and she fell against the bearded man. His false beard slipped, and Raistlin knew him. Barum. Tika put her hand to Barum's face, pretending to be concerned about him, but in reality to repair the damage swiftly, sticking the beard back into place. The group passed so close by Raistlin that he could have reached out his hand and touched Caramon's arm, the strong arm that had so often supported him, held him, comforted him, defended him. Raistlin turned his attention to the man with the false beard. Raistlin had promised to deliver Barum Everman to Tacitus, and there was the Everman, not an arm's length away. Raistlin drew in a soft breath. The idea burst like an exploding star inside his head, dazzling him. His heart leaped with excitement, his hands shook. He had thought only to see his sister, Kitiara, wear the crown. That had been the extent of his ambition, his desire. He had never dreamed he would be handed the ability to bring down Queen Tacitus. He quickly squelched the thought, mindful of the voice in his head. Fistendentilus was out there, watching, waiting, biding his time. Two suns cannot travel in the same orbit. Raistlin dragged his hood over his face and shrank back against the wall. Clerics and soldiers shoved past him, shielding him from sight. The Draconians continued on, bullying their way through the crowd until Raistlin lost sight of them. "Where are they taking the prisoners?" he asked his guide. To the dungeons below the temple, she replied, her lip curled in disapproval. I don't know why the stupid gods brought that filth into the main level. The Dracos should have entered through the proper gate. But what can you expect of those lizard brains? I always said creating them was a mistake. True, thought Raistlin, but not for the reason the guide imagined. The Dark Queen's draconians, born into the world to help her conquer it, were taking the one man in the world who could cause her to lose it to the one place in the world where he needed to be. The Foundation Stone. Chapter 14. A Reunion of Sorts. The Spell Trap. 26th day, month of Mishamont, year 352 AC. Midday services were held at various locations throughout the temple. Raistlin's guide led him up 26 stairs to a place known simply as the Abbey. A place of worship and meditation, according to his guide, where no sight or sound intrudes on the senses that might distract one from adoring our queen. Apparently that included light. They entered a winding passageway that was utterly, impenetrably dark. Raistlin had to feel his way along, keeping one hand on the stone wall and shuffling his feet over the floor so as not to trip over something. His guide considered the darkness deeply symbolic. We mortals are blind and must rely upon our queen to guide us. We are deaf and hear only her voice. The pilgrim told him before they entered the sacred place. No light is permitted in the abbey. No one is allowed to speak. Holy spells maintain the darkness and the silence. Raistlin thought it all highly annoying. He knew the passage ended only when he bumped into a wall and bruised his forehead. He could not see anything, he could not hear anything. He could smell and he could feel, however, and both those senses told him that the room was filled with people. Raistlin's guide pressed her hand on his shoulder, indicating he was to kneel. Raistlin pretended to do so, and the moment she let loose of him, he slipped away from her. Not wanting to become lost, he kept near the door and remained standing by the entrance, leaning on the staff of mages. At least, he reflected, he had time to think, examine his plan, go over it in his mind. He was settling down to enjoy the silence when he was startled and unnerved to hear voices rising in a chant. A shiver crept over his flesh. The room was silent, yet the voices were loud and dinned in his ears. Everything happens for a reason, because Takhisis wants it to happen, the clerics intoned. Everything I do is done by her dark majesty's grace. Everything I do is at her dark majesty's behest. Freedom is an illusion. As Raistlin listened, the terrible thought came to him. What if they are right? What if everything I'm doing is because Takhisis is telling me to do it? What if she is the one who brought me to Neraka? What if she is the one who has protected me, saved me, guided me? She is leading me to my destruction. He was standing by the door, and he had only to turn and leave. He turned and found himself pressed against a wall. He slid along the wall, hoping he was going the right way, only to find his path blocked by the bodies of devout clerics. He tried another direction, and by that time he was turned around in the blinding, suffocating night. He could not find the way out. He was sweating. The gold medallion around his neck was like a stone, seeming to weigh him down. He shuffled along the floor, tripping over people. A hand reached out and clutched at his ankle, and his heart nearly stopped beating. This will be my future if I give in to her, Raistlin realized suddenly. I would be lost in the darkness, disembodied, like Fistanatalis. I will be alone and afraid, always afraid. Everything I do is done by her dark majesty's grace. Everything I do is at her dark majesty's will. Lies, all lies, he thought. Fear, that is her will. Raistlin came to a halt. He stared fixedly into the darkness, and it seemed to him that the darkness blinked. When the hour of prayer and meditation finally ended, the dark pilgrims rose stiffly from where they had been kneeling on the floor and began to wend their way out. The darkness spell remained, and they moved slowly, feeling their way. Raistlin found the exit easily. He had been standing right next to it all the time. He breathed an inward sigh of relief when he once more returned to the main part of the temple. Although the light here was dim, it was light. "I must attend to my duties now," his guide told him apologetically. "Will you be all right on your own?" Raistlin assured her he would be fine. She told him where to find the dining hall and said that he was free to see the wonders of the rest of the temple. "There are only a few areas which are prohibited," she said. "The chambers of the High Lords, which are in the tower, and the council chamber." "What about the dungeons?" Raistlin asked. The guide frowned. "Why would you want to go there?" "I'm a servant of Morgan," said Raistlin in his soft voice. "I am commanded to bring my god new followers. I find that those rotting in prison cells tend to be receptive to his message." The guide grimaced in disgust. Most dark pilgrims loathed Morgan and his priests, and their methods of preying upon the sick, luring them with false promises of renewed health to draw them into a hideous bargain from which not even death would free them. Raistlin's guide said caustically that if he wanted to visit the dungeons, he could do so. She cautioned him not to get lost. "The Nightlord and the other dignitaries will be gathering here an hour prior to the time of the council meeting. You should be here if you want to join them." Raistlin said that nothing would make him happier, and he promised to be back 2 hours before he was wanted. His guide left him, and he found his way down from the upper level of the temple to the lower. He counted the stairs as he descended and marked his mental map accordingly. Raistlin found his friends in the holding cell. He did not approach, but observed them from a distance. The passageways in the dungeons were narrow and twisted and shadowy. Torches and iron baskets set at intervals on the walls shed puddles of light on the floor. The stench was frightful. A combination of blood, decaying flesh, corpses were often left chained to the walls for days before being removed, and filth. A bored hobgoblin jailer sat tilted back in a chair, amusing himself by throwing his knife at rats. He held his knife in his hand, and whenever a rat skittered out of the shadows, he would hurl the knife at it. If he hit the rat, he would scratch a mark upon the stone wall. If he missed, he would scowl and grumble and make another mark in a different place on the wall. His aim was poor, and judging by the number of marks for their side, the rats were winning. Absorbed in his contest, the hobgoblin paid no attention to his prisoners. There was no reason he should. They were obviously not going anywhere, and even if they managed to escape, they would lose their way in the convoluted tangle of planar shifting tunnels, or tumble into a pool of acid, or fall victim to one of the other traps placed in the corridors. In the dim light, Raistlin could see Caramon slumped on a bench at the far end of the holding cell. He was pretending to be asleep and, not being a very good actor, was doing a poor job of it. Tika, the opposite end, held Tass's head in her lap. Tass was still unconscious, though by his moaning he was at least alive. Beren sat on a bench, his vacant eyes staring into the darkness. His head was cocked as though he were listening to a loved one's voice. He spoke softly in reply. "I'm coming, Jasla. Don't leave me." Raistlin toyed with the idea of freeing Beren. He discarded it almost immediately. Now was not the time. Takhisis was watching. Better to wait until nightfall, when her attention was focused on the battle for power among her high lords. The only problem with that plan was that Beren was likely to be discovered long before night fell. The false goat hair beard he wore to conceal his features was starting to slip off. His laced shirt front gaped open slightly, and Raistlin could see a faint gleam of green light from the emerald in his chest. If Raistlin could see it, so could the hobgoblin jailer. All he had to do was look away from his contest with the rats. "You are in danger, Caramon," Raistlin warned silently. "Open your eyes." And that moment, as though Caramon had heard his brother's voice, he opened his eyes and saw the glint of green. Caramon yawned and heaved himself to his feet, stretching his arms as though stiff from sitting. He glanced at the jailer. The hobgoblin was watching a rat that was trying to make up its mind if it would be safe enough to emerge from its hole in the wall. Caramon sauntered nonchalantly over to Beren and, keeping one eye on the hobgoblin, swiftly drew the lacings to Beren's shirt front closed. The glint of light from the emerald vanished. Caramon was about to try to stick the false beard back in place when the hobgoblin hurled his knife, missed, and swore. The knife clanged against the wall. The rat, chittering in glee, made a dash for it. Caramon sat down hurriedly, crossing his arms over his chest and feigning sleep. Raistlin fixed his gaze, his thoughts on Caramon. "You can do this, my brother. I have often called you a fool, but you're not. You're smarter than you think. Stand on your own. You don't need me. You don't need Tanis. I will create the diversion, and you will act." Caramon sat bolt upright on the bench. "Raist," he called out. "Raist, where are you?" Tika had been patting Tass's cheek, trying to rouse him. Caramon's shout made her jump. She stared at him reproachfully. "Stop it, Caramon," she said wearily, her eyes filling with tears. "Raistlin is gone. Get that into your head." Caramon flushed. "I must have been dreaming," he mumbled. Tika sighed bleakly and went back to trying to rouse Tass. Caramon slumped down on the bench, but he didn't close his eyes. "I guess it's up to me," he said with a sigh. "Jasla's calling," said Beren. "Yeah," said Caramon. "I know, but you can't go to her now. We have to wait." He laid his hand on Beren's arm, calming, protecting. Raistlin thought how often he'd been annoyed by that same protective hand. He turned away, retracing his steps along the passage, moving away from the main prison area, deeper into the darkness. He was not certain where he was going, though he had some idea. When he came to the place where the corridor branched off in different directions, he chose the passage that sloped downward, the passage that was darkest, the passage that smelled the worst. The air was dank and fetid. The walls were wet to the touch, the floor covered with slime. Torches lit the way, but their light was feeble, as though they, too, struggled to survive in the oppressive dark. Raistlin spoke the word that caused his staff to shine, and the globe of crystal glimmered palely, barely enough for him to see. He moved quietly, treading softly, alert to any sound. Arriving at the top of a staircase, he paused to listen. Voices, the guttural, sibilant voices of draconian gods, drifted up from below. Hidden in the darkness, Raistlin removed the golden medallion of faith from around his neck and dropped it into a pocket. He took several pouches from around his neck and tied them to the belt of his black robes. Then, dousing the light of his staff, he crept down the stairs. Rounding a corner, he saw a guard room with several Baz draconians seated at a table with their Bozak commander, playing at bones beneath the light of a single torch. Two more Baz stood at attention in front of a stone arch. Beyond the arch was darkness vaster and deeper than the darkness of death. Raistlin remained on the landing at the bend of the staircase and listened to the draconians talk. What he heard confirmed his theory. He gave a loud ahem and walked loudly down the stairs, his staff thumping on the stone. The draconians leaped to their feet, drawing their swords. Raistlin came into view, and at the sight of his wizard's robes, the draconians relaxed, though they kept their clawed hands on their sword hilts. "What do you want, Black Robe?" asked the Bozak. "I have been commanded to renew the spell traps that guard the foundation stone," said Raistlin. He was taking an enormous risk mentioning the foundation stone. If he had made the wrong surmise, and those draconians were guarding something else, he would soon be fighting for his life. The Bozak commander eyed Raistlin suspiciously. "You're not the usual wizard," said the Bozak. "Where is he this night?" Raistlin heard the inflection on the word, realizing it was a test. He gave a snort. "You must have extremely poor eyesight, Commander, if you mistook Mistress Yolanthe for a man." The Baz Draconians hooted and made rude comments at their commander's expense. The Bozak silenced them with a growl and slid his sword back into its sheath. "Get on with it, then." Raistlin crossed to the arch that was festooned with cobwebs. He lifted his staff and let the magical light play over the web. He spoke a few words of magic. The strands glistened with a faint radiance that almost immediately died. The Draconians went back to their game. "A good thing I came," said Raistlin. "The magic is starting to fail." "Where is the witch tonight?" the Bozak asked in casual tones that were a little too casual. "I hear she's dead," said Raistlin. "She tried to assassinate the Emperor." He saw out of the corner of his eye the Bozak and the Baz exchange glances. The Bozak muttered something about her death being a waste of a fine female. Raistlin started to walk through the arch. "Stop right there, Black Robe," said the Bozak. "No one allowed past this point." "Why not?" asked Raistlin, feigning surprise. "I need to check the other traps." "Orders," said the Bozak. "What is out there, then?" Raistlin asked curiously. The Bozak shrugged. "Don't know, don't care." Guards were not posted to guard nothing. Raistlin was now firmly convinced that the foundation stone lay through that arch. He tried to catch a glimpse of the fabled stone, but if it was there, he could not see it. He looked up at the arch. A strange feeling came over him. His flesh crawled, as when someone steps on your grave. He could not figure out why, except that he had the oddest impression he had seen the archway before. The stonework of the arch was ancient, far older than the guardroom, which appeared to have been recently built. Raistlin could discern the faint outlines of carvings on the marble blocks that formed the arch, and though the carvings were faded and damaged, he recognized them. Each marble block was engraved with a symbol for the gods. Raistlin looked to the keystone, the center point of the arch, and though the lines were faint, he could see the symbol of Paladine. He closed his eyes, and the temple of Istar filled his vision, beautiful and graceful, white marble shining in the sunlight. He opened his eyes and looked into the twisted darkness of the temple of Takhiz, and he knew with unerring certainty what lay beyond, the past and the present. "What's taking you so damn long?" the Bozak demanded. "I cannot figure out what type of spell Mistress Yolanthe has cast," said Raistlin, frowning and seeming puzzlement. "Tell me, what would happen if someone were to pass through the arch?" "All holy hell breaks loose," said the Bozak with a relish. "Trumpets sound the alarm, or so I hear. I wouldn't know myself. It's never happened. No one has ever gone through the arch." "These trumpets," said Raistlin, "can they be heard in all parts of the temple, even the council hall?" The Draconian grunted. "From what I'm told, the dead can hear them. The noise will sound like the end of the world." Raistlin cast a rudimentary spell on the cobwebs, then started to leave. He paused and said as an afterthought, "Do any of you know, by chance, where they have taken the elf woman they call the Golden General? I'm supposed to interrogate her. I thought she would be in the dungeons, but I cannot locate her." The Draconians had no idea. Raistlin sighed and shrugged. Well, he had tried. He climbed back up the stairs, thinking as he went that the trap he had set was so obvious, only a complete moron would stumble into it. Chapter 15. The Nightlord, paying a debt, 26th day, month of Mishamont, year 352 AC. Temple bells rang the hour. The time of the council meeting was drawing near, and Raistlin still had to make his way back to the upper level. Once he was out of sight of the guards, he removed his pouches and concealed them once more beneath his robes. He put on the golden chain and the medallion of faith, transforming himself from wizard to cleric, and left the dungeons, counting the stairs to find his way to the upper regions of the temple, where the Nightlord's entourage was gathering. Raistlin joined the group of spiriters in an antechamber outside the council hall. He kept apart from the others, not wanting to draw attention to himself. He did not speak to anyone, but stood in the shadows, head bowed, his hood over his head. His limp was pronounced. He leaned heavily on his staff. A few of the spiriters glanced at him, and one started to approach him. "He's a follower of Morgan," said another, and the cleric changed his mind. After that, everyone left Raistlin severely alone. The Nightlord made his appearance, accompanied by an aide. The Nightlord was clad in a black velvet robe over which he wore vestments shimmering with the 5 colors of the 5 heads of the dragon Takhiz. The spiriters, dressed in their own ceremonial garb, clustered around him. The Nightlord was in an excellent humor. He greeted each spiritor in turn, then his flat and empty eyes turned upon Raistlin. "I'm told you are a worshipper of Morgan," said the Nightlord. "It is not often we have one of his followers among us, especially one of such high rank. You are welcome, spiritor." The Nightlord stopped talking. His eyes narrowed. He studied Raistlin. "Have we met, Spiritor?" the Nightlord asked, and though his tone was pleasant, the expression in his eyes was not. "Something about you seems familiar. Put back your hood. Let me see your face." "My face is not pleasant to look upon, Nightlord," said Raistlin in a harsh voice, as different from his own as he could make it. "I'm not easily shocked. This very morning I cut off a man's nose and gouged out his eyes," said the Nightlord, smiling. "He was a spy, and that is what I do to spies. Let me see your face, Spiritor." Raistlin tensed, cursing his luck. He should not have come up here. He should have foreseen the danger that the Nightlord would recognize him. They would not bother taking him to the dungeons. The Nightlord would kill him here, where he stood. "Take off the hood. Show him your face," said Fistandentilus. "Shut up," Raistlin hissed under his breath. Aloud he said, "My lord, I have sworn an oath to Morgan." "Show up your face!" The Nightlord took hold of his medallion of faith and began to chant. "Tarkisis, hear my prayer. He will kill you where you stand. Take off the hood. As you said, we are both in this together, for the moment." Slowly, reluctantly, Raistlin took hold of the hood and drew it from his head. One of the spiritors covered her mouth with her hand and gagged. The others averted their eyes and shrank back from him. The Nightlord looked away, not from disgust, but because he had lost interest. He had not unmasked a spy, merely a diseased follower of a loathsome god. "Cover your face," said the Nightlord, waving his hand. "My apologies to Morgan, if I have offended him." Raistlin drew his hood over his head. "Once again I have saved you, young one." Raistlin pressed his hand against his temple, longing to reach into his skull and rip the voice out of his head. Fistandentilus chuckled. "You owe me, and you pride yourself on paying your debts." A hand squeezed Raistlin's heart. His chest hurt. He struggled to breathe and was seized by a fit of coughing that doubled him over. He pressed his hand to his mouth. His fingers were covered in blood. Raistlin cursed inwardly, impotently. He cursed and coughed until he was dizzy, and he sagged back against a wall. The spiritors eyed him in alarm. The word "contagion" was on everyone's lips, and they nearly came to blows trying to get away from him. Then the sound of a gong reverberated throughout the temple. The spiritors forgot Raistlin in their excitement. "The bell summons us, my lord," said the aide, and he opened the double doors that led from the chamber into the council hall. The spiritors crowded around the door, eager to witness the procession of high lords and the arrival of the emperor. "Must you gawk like peasants?" the Nightlord said angrily. The spiritors, looking chastened, left the door and returned to the antechamber. "The emperor's troops are gathering around his throne," reported the aide from his position at the door. "They are making ready for the emperor." "We enter after Hourglass," said the Nightlord. "Line up!" The aide bustled around, forming the spiritors into two lines. The Nightlord took his place at the end. No one paid attention to Raistlin, who was leaning on his staff, gasping for breath and trying to clear his mind. The thunder of tramping feet, marching in time to the rhythmic thumping of a drum, and shouted commands of officers caused the floor to shake. "First will come the procession of pilgrims," the Nightlord told his spiritors. "When all of you have assembled on the platform, I will enter and take the place of honor beside her dark majesty." The soldiers in the hall began to cheer. "See what is going on," the Night Lord commanded his aide. "The Emperor has entered the hall," the aide reported. "Is he wearing the crown of power?" the Night Lord asked tersely. He wears the armor of a dragon, High Lord," reported the aide, "a cape of royal purple and the crown of power." The Night Lord's face contorted in anger. His outraged voice sounded shrill above the thunderous ovation. "The crown is a holy artifact. When Queen Tachisis has conquered the world, we will see who wears the crown." The spiriters stood in line, expectant, excited, awaiting the signal and the arrival of their queen. Raistlin fell in at the end. He began to cough. The cleric in front of him whipped around to glare at him. Arichas's troops cheered him and kept on cheering. Arichas appeared to be in no hurry to stop them, for the cheering grew louder and more raucous. The soldiers struck the floor with their spears and banged their swords against their shields and roared his name. The spiriters were growing tired of waiting. They began to mutter and shift impatiently. The Night Lord scowled and demanded to know what was happening. "Arichas is making his reverence to the throne of the Dark Queen," the aide reported from his place at the door. He had to shout to make himself heard. "Has her Dark Majesty arrived?" the Night Lord asked. "No, your lordship. Her throne remains empty." "Good," said the Night Lord. "We will be there to welcome her." The spiriters fidgeted. The Night Lord's foot tapped the floor. Finally, the cheering began to die. A hush settled over the troops. Another gong sounded. "That is our signal," said the Night Lord. "Make ready." The spiriters readjusted their hoods and smoothed their robes. A trumpet sounded and cheers again erupted in the hall, as loud or louder than those that greeted the Emperor. The Night Lord was pleased. He made a gesture, and the line of spiriters began to move toward the door. From there they would walk out onto the narrow stone bridge that led from the antechamber to the throne of the Dark Queen. The first two spiriters were at the door, when the aide suddenly cried out for them to stop. "Why? What for?" the Night Lord asked, frowning in displeasure. "The signal was for High Lord Kitiara, your lordship," the aide said, trembling. "The Blue Lady and her troops are coming into the hall now." The Night Lord paled with fury. The spiriters broke ranks and clustered angrily around their leader, all of them clamoring to be heard. The entrance of a draconian, wearing the insignia of the Emperor's guard, brought sudden chill silence. "What do you want?" asked the Night Lord, glowering. "His Imperial Majesty Arichas extends his respects to the Night Lord of Queen Tachisis," said the draconian. "The Emperor has sent me to inform your lordship that there has been a change in plans. Your lordship and these honored holy men will enter the hall after the High Lord of the White Dragon Army, Lord Toady. The Emperor—" "I will not," said the Night Lord, dangerously calm. "I beg your lordship's pardon," said the draconian. "You heard me. I will not enter last. In fact, I will not enter at all. You may so inform Arichas." "I will inform the Emperor," said the draconian, and with a bow and a disdainful flick of his tail he departed. The Night Lord cast a grim glance around at his clerics. "Arichas insults me, and, by insulting me, he insults our queen. I will not stand for it, and neither will she. We will go to the Abbey and give her our prayerful support." The spiriters swept out of the room, their robes rustling with righteous indignation. Raistlin started to join them. He took a step, then, clutching at his chest, cried out in pain. His staff fell from his limp hand. He stumbled, staggered, and sank to his knees, coughing and spewing up blood. With a groan, he slumped onto his belly and lay on the floor, twitching and writhing with agony. The spiriters stopped, staring at him in alarm. Several looked uncertainly at the Nightlord. "Should we help?" asked one. "Leave him. Morgan will see to his cleric," said the Nightlord, and he waved his hand dismissively and hastened off. The spiriters did not wait to be told twice. Covering their mouths and noses with their black sleeves, they tried to get away from Raistlin as fast as possible. Once he was certain he was alone, Raistlin rose to his feet. He picked up the staff of mages and walked to the door and looked out into the hall. A narrow bridge of black stone extended some distance ahead of him. At the end was the shadowy alcove and the throne of the Dark Queen. She had not yet made an appearance. Perhaps she was in the Abbey, listening to the complaints of her Nightlord. In the hall, drums beat and soldiers cheered. Another Dragon Nightlord was making his grand entrance. Raistlin ventured out onto the bridge. He did not go far. He wanted to see, not to be seen. The bridge had no rails, no barriers. Raistlin peered over the edge, looking down on the heads of the crowd that was far below him. The soldiers surged and heaved and wriggled, reminding him of maggots feeding off rotting flesh. The platforms on which the Dragon High Lords had their thrones rose high above the floor. Narrow stone bridges extended from the antechambers of each High Lord to the throne. Thus, the High Lords were spared the need of walking among the masses. Arrakis' throne reared above all the others. His throne was in the place of honor, directly beneath the Dark Queen's alcove. The Emperor's throne was made of onyx and was plain and unadorned. Takhisis' throne, by contrast, was hideously beautiful. The back of the throne was formed of the gracefully curving necks and heads of 5 dragons, 2 on the right, 2 on the left, and 1 in the center. The arms of the throne were the dragon's legs, the seat the dragon's breast. The throne was made entirely of jewels, emeralds, rubies, sapphires, pearls, and black diamonds. From his vantage point on the bridge, Raistlin could see 2 of the other High Lords, the handsome and disdainful face of Salah Khan, and the ugly, cunning face of the half-ogre Lucien of Takar. The white throne was empty. Arrakis had been shouting for Lord Toady, High Lord of the White, but no one by that name was answering. The same Toady who had been Few Master in Solace, the same Toady whose search for the blue crystal staff had plunged Raistlin and his friends into danger and started them on the bright and shining, dark and tortuous path they walked. Raistlin could not see Kitiara from where he stood. She must be seated on the throne to Arrakis' right. Raistlin advanced along the bridge. He no longer worried about anyone below seeing him. The domed ceiling of the hall was wreathed in smoke from the breath of the dragons, who were watching from their alcoves high above, and from the hundreds of torches mounted on the walls, and the fires burning in iron braziers. In his black robes, Raistlin was just another shadow in a hall of shadows. Takhisis would be watching him, as she was watching with avid interest everything that was going on. The air in the hall reeked of smoke and steel, leather and intrigue. Certainly Arroycus must have smelled the stench, and yet he sat on his throne alone, isolated, apart, supremely confident and invincible. He had no armed guards, only the crown of power. Let his underlings ring themselves round with steel. Arroycus feared nothing and no one. He had the backing of his queen. But does he? Raistlin wondered. A ruler is supposed to appear confident. Even arrogance has its place upon the throne. But no god can forgive hubris. The last living man who had worn the crown had suffered from that malady. The king priest of Istar had believed himself to be as powerful as any god. The gods of Krynn had shown him power. They had sent a fiery mountain crashing down upon his head. Arroycus had made the mistake of thinking too well of himself. Raistlin was finally in a position where he could see Kitiara, and with her was Tanis half-elven. Chapter 16. Crown of Love, Crown of Power, 26th day, month of Mishamont, year 352 AC. Raistlin had not anticipated finding Tanis there, and he was annoyed. The presence of the half-elf could seriously disrupt his plans. Tanis was not standing at Kit's side. No one was allowed on the platform with the High Lord, but he was as close to her as he could manage, however, standing on the step leading to the throne. Raistlin's lip curled. Tanis had come to Neraka to save the woman he loved, but did he know, even at that moment, which woman that was? The council meeting proceeded. Raistlin, high above the thrones of the High Lords, could hear Arroycus's deep bellow, but much of what he was saying was swallowed by the vastness of the chamber. From what he could gather, High Lord Toady was not there because he had been slain by Candor, and that news prompted a sound Raistlin could hear clearly. Kitiara's scornful laughter. Arroycus was furious. He rose to his feet and started to descend the platform. Kitiara did not move. Her soldiers grabbed their weapons. Raistlin was amused to see Tanis take a protective step toward Kit, who remained seated on her throne, regarding Arroycus with a look of unutterable scorn. The other two High Lords were on their feet, watching with interest, neither offering any support, both probably hoping Arroycus and Kit would kill each other. Raistlin walked to the edge of the bridge and looked down on Arroycus, who was directly beneath him. That was the moment to strike. No one was paying any attention to him. Everyone was watching the High Lords. Raistlin readied his magic. Then he went blind. Darkness obliterated his sight, filled his mind, his heart, his lungs. He froze in place, for he was standing on the edge of the bridge. A wrong step would carry him over. He could always use the magic of his staff, which would allow him to float like a feather through the air, but everyone in the hall would see him, including Arroycus, unless they were all blind as he was at the moment. Reading his thoughts, an unseen hand tore his staff from his grasp and smote him in the back. His heart lurking in terror, he pitched forward. He landed hard on his knees, and though his wrists tingled and his knees were bruised, he shook with relief, for he had not plunged over the edge. He reached out a shaking hand and felt nothing in front of him except air, and realized how close he had come. He longed to crawl to safety, but he had lost all sense of direction, and he feared that he might yet fall. The hand was pounding him, grinding him, crushing him into the stone. Then suddenly, when it seemed his heart would burst, the hand released him. The darkness lifted from his eyes. Raistlin scrambled back until he bumped into something solid. The Dark Queen's throne. Raistlin turned to face her. not because he wanted to, but because she compelled him, and that was her mistake. She was a shadow, and for Raistlin the shadows held no terror. He looked down to see his sister and the rest groveling in fear. Gitiar cowered on her throne. Tanis, half-elven, had been driven to his knees. Arrakis knelt before his queen. They were nothing, and she was everything. Takhisis had her foot on their necks. Once she was assured of their submissiveness, once she was certain that they knew she owned them, she lifted her foot and permitted them to rise. Her gaze flicked over Raistlin, and he knew himself forgotten. He was nothing, a non-entity, a grain of sand, a speck of dust, a drop of water, a flake of ash. Her attention was focused on those who held the power, those who were important to her, her high lords, and the struggle that would end with the most powerful among them ascending to the throne and dealing the death blow to the forces of light. Raistlin blended into the darkness, became the darkness. He watched and waited for his chance. Takhisis began to orate. Gitiar looked pleased, Arrakis baleful. Raistlin could not hear what the queen was saying. She was talking to those who mattered. He watched the proceedings, feeling as though he were watching a play from the last seat in the very last row. Gitiar left her throne and, motioning to Tanis, descended the stairs and advanced onto the floor of the hall. The soldiers fell back to give her room. Tanis walked behind her like a whipped dog brought to heel. A platform reared up like a striking snake from the middle of the hall. Gitiar climbed the spiky stairs that were difficult to traverse, apparently, for Tanis, coming after her, kept slipping, much to the amusement of the onlookers. Following the analogy of a play, Tanis was the understudy called on to perform at the last moment. He had not rehearsed, did not know his lines. Gitiar made a grand gesture, and Lord Soth entered, his awful presence overpowering all the other actors in the piece. The Death Knight carried in his arms a body wrapped in white cloth. He laid the shrouded figure at Gitiar's feet, then he vanished. A dramatic exit. Gitiar reached down and unwound the cloth. The light shone on golden hair. Raistlin moved closer to the edge of the bridge for a better view as Lorana struggled to fight her way out of the winding sheet. Tanis instinctively reached out to help her. Gitiar stopped him with a look. When he obeyed her, she rewarded him with that crooked smile. Raistlin watched with interest. Together at last were the three who had started it all, the three who symbolized the struggle, the darkness and the light and the soul that wavered in between. Lorana stood tall and proud in her silver armor, and she was all that Raistlin remembered of beauty. He looked down on her, and he sighed softly and pressed his lips together grimly. He knew loss in that moment, but he also knew she had never been his to lose. Tanis looked at Lorana, and Raistlin saw that the wavering soul had finally made the choice. Or perhaps Tanis' soul had made the choice long before, and his heart had just now caught up. Love's light illuminated the two of them, shutting out Gitiar, leaving her alone in the darkness. Kit understood, and the knowledge was bitter. Raistlin saw her crooked smile twist and harden. "So you are capable of love, my sister," said Raistlin, and he knew then that he would have his chance. Gitiar ordered Tanis to lay his sword at the foot of the Emperor, swear fealty to Arrakis. Tanis obeyed. What else could he do when the woman he loved was a prisoner of the woman he had once imagined he loved? It was strange that Lorana, the prisoner, was the only one of the three who was truly free. She loved Tanis with her entire being, Her love had brought her to this place of darkness, and her light shone more brightly still. Her love was her own, and if Tanis did not return it, that no longer mattered. Love strengthened her, ennobled her. Her love for one opened her heart to love for all. Kitiara, by contrast, was tangled in a web of her own passions, always reaching for the prize that hung out of reach. Love to her meant power over one, and that meant power over all. Tanis climbed the stairs leading to the throne of Arrakis, and Raistlin saw the half-elf's eyes go to the crown. Tanis's gaze fixed on it. His lips moved unconsciously, repeating the words, "Whoever wears the crown rules." His expression hardened. His hand clenched on the hilt of the sword. Raistlin understood Tanis's plan as clearly as if he and the half-elf had spent years working on it. In a sense, perhaps they had. The two of them had always been close in a way none of their friends had ever understood. Darkness speaking to dark, perhaps. And what of Takis's? Did the queen know that the half-elf, shaven clean, of the beard that had once hidden his shame, climbed the stairs toward destiny, prepared to sacrifice his life for the sake of others? Did she know that in the heart of her darkness, down in her dungeons, a kender and a barmaid and a warrior were grimly prepared to do the same? Did Takhisis realize that the wizard wearing the black robes that marked his allegiance to self-serving ambition would be ready to sacrifice his life for the freedom to walk whatever path he chose? Raistlin raised his hand. The words to the spell he had memorized the night before blazed in his mind like the words he'd written in blood on the lambskin. Tanis climbed the stairs, his hand clutching his sword's hilt. Raistlin recognized the sword. Alana Starbreeze had given it to Tanis in Sylvanesti. The sword was Wormsbane, the mate to the sword Tanis had received from the dead elf king Kithkanan in Pax Sarkis. Raistlin remembered that the weapon was magical, though he could not remember at that moment what magic the sword possessed. It didn't matter. The sword's magic would not be powerful enough to pierce the magical field generated by the crown of power. When his sword struck that field, the blast would blow him apart. Arrakis would remain safe behind the shield, not so much as a splatter of blood smearing his gleaming armor. Tanis reached the top of the stairs, and he started to draw his sword. He was nervous. His hands shook. Arrakis stood up from the throne, planting his powerful legs and crossing his bulging arms over his chest. He was not looking at Tanis. He was staring across the hall at Kitiara, who had her own arms crossed and was staring defiantly back. Multicolored light flared from the crown and shimmered around Arrakis, making it seem as though he were being guarded by a shield of rainbows. Tanis slid his sword from the sheath, and the sound. Arrakis' attention snapped back to the half-elf. He looked down his nose at him, sneered at him, trying to intimidate him. Tanis didn't notice. He was staring at the crown, his eyes wide with dismay. He had just realized his plan to kill Arrakis must fail. Raistlin's spell burned on his lips. The magic burned in his blood. He had no time for Tanis's eternal wavering. "Strike, Tanis," Raistlin urged. "Do not fear the magic. I will aid you." Tanis looked startled, and he glanced toward the direction of the sound that he must have heard more with his heart than with his ears, for Raistlin had spoken softly. Arrakis was starting to grow impatient. A man of action, he was bored with the ceremony. He considered the council meeting a waste of time that could be spent more profitably pursuing the war. He gave a snarl and made a peremptory gesture indicating Tanis was to swear his fealty and get on with it. Still Tanis hesitated. "Strike, Tanis, swiftly," Raistlin urged. Tanis stared straight at Raistlin, but whether he could see him or not, whether he would act or not, Raistlin could not tell. Tanis started to lay the sword down on the floor. Then, resolve hardening his expression, he shifted his stance and aimed a blow at Hourglass. Raistlin and Caramon had often fought together, combining sorcery and steel. As Tanis's sword arm started to rise, Raistlin cast his spell. "Bentuk nir dayasir, kolang semua persona talam, perubahan ke sihir nir." Raistlin cried, and, drawing a rune in the air, he hurled the spell at Hourglass. The magic flowed through Raistlin and burst from him, crackling out of his fingertips, blazing through the air. The magic struck the rainbow shield, dispelling it. Tanis's sword met no obstacle. Wormsbane pierced Hourglass's black dragon-scale breastplate, sliced through flesh and muscle and bone, and sank deep into his chest. Hourglass roared, more in astonishment than in pain. The agony of dying, and the terrible knowledge that he was dying, would come to him with his next and final breath. Raistlin did not linger to see the end. He did not care who would win the crown of power. For the moment, the Dark Queen was intent upon the struggle. He had to make good his escape. But the powerful spell he had cast had weakened him. He stifled a cough in the sleeve of his robes and, grabbing his staff, ran along the bridge, heading back toward the antechamber. He had almost reached the entrance when a mass of draconian gauze blocked his way. "The foul assassin!" Raistlin gasped, gesturing. "A wizard! I tried to stop him." The draconian didn't wait, but shoved Raistlin aside, slamming him back into the walls. Soldiers flowed around him, dashing down the bridge. They would soon realize that they had been duped, and they would be back. Raistlin, coughing, fumbled in his pouch and took out the dragon orb. He barely had breath enough left to chant the words. The next thing he knew, he was standing in front of Caramon's cell. The door was open. The cell was empty. A charred patch on the floor was all that remained of a Bozak draconian. A pile of greasy ash denoted the demise of a Baz draconian. Caramon and Barum, Tika and Tas were gone. Raistlin heard guttural voices shouting that the prisoners had escaped. But where had they gone? Raistlin swore under his breath and looked around for some clue. At the end of the corridor, an iron door had been torn off its hinges. Jasla was calling, and Barum had answered. Raistlin leaned on the staff and drew in a ragged breath. He could breathe easier. His strength was returning. He was about to go in pursuit of Barum when a hand snaked out of the shadows. Cold fingers closed painfully over his wrist. Long nails scraped his skin and dug into his flesh. "Not so fast, young mages," said Fistendentalis. "We have unfinished business, you and I." The voice was real and close, no longer in his head. Raistlin could feel the old man's breath warm on his cheek. The breath came from a living body, not a live corpse. The hand held him fast. The bony fingers with their long yellowed nails tightened their grip. Raistlin could not see the face, for it was hidden in the shadows. He had no need to see it. He knew the face as well or better than he knew his own. In some ways, the face was his own. "Only one of us can be the master," said Fistendentalis. The green bloodstone mottled with red striation glistened in the light of the staff of mages. Chapter 17. The Last Battle. The Bloodstone. 26th day, month of Mishamont, year 352 AC. Raistlin was caught completely off guard. A second before, he had been triumphing in his victory over Arrakis, and between the space of one shuddering breath and another, he was held fast in the grip of his most implacable foe, a wizard Raistlin had duped and cheated and sought to destroy. Raistlin stared, mesmerized, at the bloodstone pendant dangling from the bony hand. When Fistendentalis had been a living man, he had murdered countless young mages, sucking out their lives with the bloodstone and giving the life force to himself. In desperation, Raistlin cast the only spell that came to his terrified mind, an elementary spell, one of the first he had ever learned. Ger tangis myopia. His hand flared with fire. Raistlin realized the moment he spoke that the spell would be useless against Fistendentalis. The magical flames could only harm the living. He was despairing, cursing himself, when to his amazement Fistendentalis snarled and snatched his hand away. "You are flesh and blood," Raistlin gasped, and he was heartened. He was fighting a live enemy, one that might be strong, but also one who could be killed. Falling back, Raistlin clasped the staff of mages in both hands and raised it in front of him, using it as both shield and weapon. He remembered the times Caramon had insisted his twin learn to defend himself with the staff, and how he had always tried to get out of it. "I will be your flesh and your blood," said Fistendentalis, his fleshless lips parting in a ghastly smile. "A reward from my queen." "Your queen?" Raistlin almost laughed. "A queen you plotted to overthrow." "All is forgiven between us," said Fistendentalis, "on one condition, that I destroy you. Did you honestly think your actions, your plans, would escape my notice? In return for your demise, I will become you, or rather, your young body will house me." He cast a disparaging glance over Raistlin's thin frame and sniffed. "Not the best body I have inhabited, but one that is powerful in magic. And with my knowledge and wisdom, you will become more powerful still. I hope that will be a final comfort to you in your last moments." Raistlin lashed out with the staff of mages, aiming a blow at the wizard's hooded head. But he was not particularly skilled as a fighter, not like Caramon. His strike was clumsy and slow. Fistendentalis ducked. He caught hold of the staff and jerked it out of Raistlin's hands. The staff's magic crackled. Fistendentalis cried in rage and flung the staff halfway down the corridor. Raistlin heard the crystal globe crack as the staff struck the stone floor. The glow of magic dimmed. Raistlin glanced back over his shoulder and marked where the staff lay. He fell back a step, his hand fumbling beneath his robes for the pouches that held the dragon orb and his spell components. Fistendentalis saw what he intended. He pointed at the pouches and spoke words of magic. Like iron to lodestone, the pouches flew out of Raistlin's hands and into the hands of the old man. "Bat dung and rose petals." Fistendentalis cast the pouches disdainfully to the floor. "When I am you, you will have no need of such ingredients. The master of past and present will craft magnificent magic. Too bad you will not be there to see it." Fistendentalis extended his hands, fingers spread, and began to chant, "Kalis Karan, Tobanis Kar." Raistlin recognized the spell and hurled himself to the floor. Blazing arrows of fire shot from the old man's fingertips and sizzled over Raislin's head. The scorching heat burned his hair. The staff of Mage's lay just beyond reach. The crystal globe had cracked, but the magical light continued to shine, and he saw in its light something sparkle. He was about to try to make a grab for it when he heard footsteps behind him. Fistendentalus coming to finish him off. Raistlin gave a moan and tried to rise, only to collapse onto the floor again. Fistendentalus laughed, amused at his struggles. "When I'm in your body, Majere, I will hunt down and slay your imbecile brother, who is now trying to fight his way to the Foundation Stone. Caramon will think in his final despairing moments that his beloved twin was his murderer. But then that's nothing new to poor Caramon, is it? He's already seen you kill him." Fistendentalus began chanting a spell. Raistlin did not recognize the words. He had no idea what the spell would do. Something horrible, that was certain. He moaned again and glanced surreptitiously behind him. When Fistendentalus was near, Raistlin lashed out with his feet, striking the old man in the shins and sending him crashing to the floor. The spell ended in a garbled cry and a thud. Raistlin made a lunge and a grab for the small sparkling object. His hand closed over the dragon orb, and he scrambled to his feet. A trumpet blast echoed throughout the corridor. Fistendentalus did not bother to rise. He sat on the floor, slapped his hands on his knees, and grinned up at him. "Some Morin has tripped your spell trap." The old man gathered his black robes around him and pushed himself to his feet. He took a step toward Raistlin, who opened his palm. The dragon orb's colors swirled and glowed, illuminating the corridor. "Well, go ahead, young mages," said Fistendentalus. "You have the orb. Use it. Call upon the power of the dragons to smash me to bloody pulp." Raistlin looked at the orb, at the colors swirling inside. His mouth twisted, and he looked away. Fistendentalus smiled grimly. "You don't dare to use it. You are too weak. You fear the orb will take hold of you, and you'll end up a drooling idiot like poor Lorak." He lifted the bloodstone pendant. "I promise, Majere, I won't let that happen. Your end will be swift, though not exactly painless. And now, much as I have enjoyed our little contest, my queen needs my services elsewhere." Fistendentalus began to chant. Raistlin closed his fist over the orb. The bright light welled out between his fingers. 5 rays, 5 different colors, slanting off in different directions. Raistlin raised his hand. "Cease your spellcasting, old man, or I will hurl the orb to the floor. The orb is made of crystal. It can be broken." Fistendentalus frowned. His chanting ceased. He held up the bloodstone pendant and made a squeezing motion with his hand. Raistlin's heart quivered and bounded in his chest. He gasped, unable to breathe. Fistendentalus tightened his grip, and Raistlin's heart stopped beating. He could not breathe. Black spots burst before his eyes, and he felt himself falling. Fistendentalus relaxed his grip a fraction. Raistlin's heart gave a painful lurch, and he was able to draw in a breath. Fistendentalus squeezed his hand again, and Raistlin cried out in agony and fell to the floor. He lay on his back, staring up at Fistendentalus. The old man knelt down beside Raistlin and pressed the bloodstone against Raistlin's heart. Fear, raw and bitter, gripped Raistlin. His mouth went dry. His arm muscles clenched. Sickening, hot liquid burned his throat. His fear wrung him, drained him, leaving him confused and shaken. He was not afraid of death. Weak and frail, he had fought death from the moment of his birth. Death held no terror for him. Even now, it would be easier to simply shut his eyes and let the easeful darkness wash over him. He did not fear dying. He did fear oblivion. He would be consumed by Fistendentilus, his soul devoured, swallowed up, and digested. His body would go on living, but he would not, and no one would know the difference. In the end, it would be as if he had never been. Farewell, Raistlin Majere. Raistlin was swimming in the ocean, trying to keep afloat, but he was trapped in the maelstrom, and there was no escape. The blood-red water was dragging him down, dragging him under. "Caramon, where are you?" Raistlin cried. "Caramon, I need you." He felt an arm clasp hold of him, and for a moment relief flooded through him. Then he realized that the arm was not the muscular arm of his twin. It was the bony arm of Fistendentilus clutching his victim closer, preparing to suck out his life. Fistendentilus pried open Raistlin's fingers and took hold of the dragon orb. He held it up before him and laughed. Raistlin saw to his horror his own face laughing at him. The eyes were his eyes, the pupils the shape of hourglasses. The hand that held the dragon orb was his hand. The light of the staff, which was fast dimming, glimmered on golden skin. The delicate bones, the maze of blue veins, were all his. He was losing himself, dwindling away to nothingness. Rage blazed inside Raistlin. He was too weak to use magic. The spells writhed like snakes in his mind and slithered away, and he could not catch them. But he had another weapon, the weapon a mage could use when all other weapons had failed him. Raistlin gave a flick of his wrist, and the little silver knife he wore on the thong around his forearm slid into his palm. His hand closed spasmodically over the hilt, and, with his dying strength, he wrapped his arm around Fistendentilus and pulled him close and thrust the knife into him. Raistlin felt the knife pierce flesh, and he felt it scrape horribly against bone. He had struck a rib. He jerked the knife free. Blood, warm and sticky, gummed his fingers. Fistendentilus flinched and gave a puzzled grunt, wondering at first what was wrong. Then the pain hit him, and he realized what had happened. His face, that was Raistlin's face, contorted. The hourglass eyes darkened with pain and fury. Raistlin had not dealt his foe a mortal blow, but he had gained precious time. His strength was almost gone. He had one more chance, and it would be his last. Unwittingly, Fistendentilus helped him, twisting his body in effort to try to seize the knife. Raistlin stabbed, and the blade sank deep. Fistendentilus gave a cry, only it was Raistlin's voice that screamed. Raistlin saw his own face contort in agony. He shuddered and closed his eyes and thrust the knife in deeper. He gave the blade a twist. Fistendentilus fell writhing to the floor. Raistlin let go of the knife. His hand was too weak and shaking to hold on to it. The knife remained buried up to the hilt in the black robes. Raistlin gasped for air and watched himself die. He realized suddenly he had only a few moments to act. He grabbed the bloodstone that still lay on his breast and slammed it down on the heart of the dying wizard. An eerie feeling came over Raistlin, a feeling that he had done this before. The feeling was strong and unnerving. He ignored it and kept the stone pressed to the heart, and he felt his own strength, his own being returning to him, and with it the knowledge, the wisdom, the power of the archmages. Fistendentilus opened his mouth in an attempt to cast a spell. He coughed, choked, and blood, not magic, flowed from his lips. He gave a shudder. His body went rigid. The blood bubbled on his lips. The hourglass eyes fixed in his head, and he lay still. His hand went flaccid. The dragon orb rolled onto the floor. The hourglass eyes, dark with enmity and rage, stared up at Raistlin. He looked down on himself dead, and Raistlin wondered suddenly, fearfully, if he was the one who had died, and if it was Fistanentilis who was gazing down at him. Alarmed at the thought, he snatched the bloodstone from the body, and the flow of knowledge ended abruptly. He did not know what he had gleaned. His head was littered with strange spells and arcane knowledge. He was reminded of the confusion in the library in the wretched tower of high sorcery in Neraka. He rose shakily to his feet, and he was suddenly aware that he was not alone. By the light of the staff of Mages once more burning brightly, he could see on the wall a shadow, 5 heads of the Dark Queen. "Well done, Fistanentilis." Raistlin caught his breath and cautiously looked up. "Raistlin Majere is dead. You have slain him." The shadowy eyes of the shadowy heads stared at something in his hand. He looked down to see that he was holding the bloodstone pendant. "Yes, my queen," he said. "Raistlin Majere is dead. I have killed him." "Good. Now make haste to the foundation stone. You are the final guardian." The heads vanished. The Dark Queen, intent upon other dangers, disappeared. "Not even the gods can tell the difference," Raistlin murmured. He looked at the bloodstone pendant. As the wizard's dark soul flooded into his, Raistlin had glimpsed unspeakable acts, countless murders, and other crimes too terrible to name. He closed his hand over the pendant, then flung it into one of the acid pools. He watched the acid devour the pendant, as the pendant had almost devoured him. He seemed to hear it hiss in anger. Raistlin held up the dragon orb. He watched the colors swirl in the light, and he chanted the words and disappeared from the tunnels, leaving the body of Raistlin Majere behind. Chapter 18. 2 brothers. 26th day, month of Mishamont, year 352 AC. Raistlin stood before a broken column encrusted with jewels that glittered temptingly, luring the unwary to their doom. He murmured the words to a spell he had not known he knew, and he traced a rune in the air. The figure of a woman appeared inside the stone. The woman was young, with a sweet and winsome face, pale with grief and sorrow, soft with yearning. The woman's eyes searched the darkness. He saw her lips move, heard her ghostly, anguished cry. "Barim comes, Jasla," Raistlin said. He was careful to avoid stepping in the underground stream, which was crawling and snapping and roiling with baby dragons. Climbing a rock ledge that ran along the foul water, he came to a place some distance from the stone where he could keep watch. He spoke the word, Dulak, and the staff's light went out. Raistlin waited in the darkness for the person who had been dumb enough, or perhaps courageous enough, to walk into his spell trap. Raistlin knew who that person was, the other half of himself. He heard the sounds of 2 people sloshing through the dragon-snapping, blood-stained water. He knew them in spite of the darkness. One was Caramon, a good man, a good brother, better than he deserved. The other was Barim Everman. The emerald glimmered, and, in answer, the jewels in the foundation stone began to glitter with a myriad of colors. Caramon walked protectively at Barim's side. His sword was in his hand, and it was stained with blood. His black armor was dented, his arms and legs were bleeding. He had a bloody gash on his head. His jovial face was pale, haggard, drawn with pain. Sorrow had marked him. The darkness had changed. The darkness had changed him. A brother lost. Raistlin looked into the future and saw the end. He saw a sister's love and forgiveness, her brother redeemed, a brother found. He saw the temple fall, the stone splitting as the Dark Queen shrieked in rage and struggled to keep her grip on the world. He saw a green dragon waiting for his command, waiting to take him to the Tower of Palanthas. The tower's gates would open at last. Shirak, said Raistlin, and the magical light of the Staff of Mages banished the darkness. Chapter 19. The End of a Journey. 26th day, month of Mishamont, year 352 AC. The temple's darkness is lit to day-like brilliance with the power of my magic. Caramon, sword in hand, can only stand beside me and watch in awe as foe after foe falls to my spells. Lightning crackles from my fingertips, flame flares from my hands, phantasms appear, so terrifyingly real that they can kill by fear alone. Goblins die screaming, pierced by the lances of legions of knights who fill the cavern with their war chants at my bidding, then disappear at my command. The baby dragons flee in terror back to the dark and secret places of their hatching. Draconians wither in the flames. Dark clerics who swarm down the stairs at their queen's last bidding are impaled upon a flight of shimmering spears, their last prayers changing to wailing curses of agony. Finally comes the Blackrobes, the eldest of the order, to destroy me, the young upstart. But they find to their dismay that, old as they are, I am in some mysterious way older still. My power is phenomenal. They know within an instant that I cannot be defeated. The air is filled with the sounds of chanting, and one by one they disappear swiftly as they came, many bowing to me in profound respect as they depart upon the wings of wish spells. They bow to me, Raistlin Majere, master of past and present. I, Mages.